Everyone, I see some people starting to join here. We're just going to give like maybe 45 seconds to a minute just for everyone to get logged in and get settled. But thanks for taking time out of your day here. And again, we'll get started in just about a minute. I see more and more people joining here. We're just holding tight while everyone gets settled. So no worries, just a couple more seconds and we'll kick off the session here. All right. Thanks for joining us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So we're scheduled for a 30-minute session. So if you have patients after this, we'll be off at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. One other thing, I don't know that we're going to have time to take Q&A at the very end, but if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to use the Zoom Q&A module, and we'll try our best to cover it. And if not, we can always follow up via email at the end. When it comes to email, so my name's Austin. If you have questions about berry melts, general questions, you would like samples, product questions, anything like that, you can feel free to reach out at any time. It's Austin, AUSTIN, at berrymelts.com. And we'll make sure that all of the follow-up emails also have that contact information listed. Last bit of housekeeping, if you would, please stick around to the end, because at the very end of the discussion, we're going to have Gianna go through, a little bit about her routine, what she's doing these days. And I think that information might be very valuable for you and your patients as well. So thanks for joining us. To kick it off, my name is Austin Rhodes. I'm on the Berry Melts marketing team, and I largely work with practitioners and medical offices. So for all of the RDs on the call, I imagine that we've interacted at some point over the years. And today we're extremely excited to have Gianna join us. She's a patient 3.5 years out from surgery, and Gianna is very well connected, very involved in the community, and also extremely knowledgeable. And so today she's not just going to be sharing her knowledge, but also her personal experience. And for that, we're very grateful. And I think it's going to be enlightening for everyone. So thank you for joining us. And with that, Gianna, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about your journey, introduce yourself, and let's get going.
Yeah, thank you, Austin. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It is truly a pleasure and such an honor to be here today with everyone and to be able to share not just my story, but some other background that I've learned about transfer addiction in bariatric patients along my journey and with my involvement in the community. So again, thank you. Just to introduce myself, as Austin said, I'm Gianna. I just turned 29 a few days ago, and I am about 3.5 years post-op from VSG, or vertical sleeve gastrectomy. I have lost and maintained over 120 pounds. And along my journey, I had an unfortunate but triumphant experience with transfer addiction. I struggled with alcohol along my journey. It was a pretty fast progression, and I'm going to kind of talk about that and how that progressed and what you can look for in your own patients who might be experiencing something similar. Because as you all know, transfer addiction is very common amongst bariatric patients, and there are things we can do, both as a community of patients and practitioners to look for the signs and to be a resource to one another and to other practitioners within the community. So through my journey, have also become a health coach. It is my goal to work with other bariatric patients to help them, overcome challenges, to be a resource and someone who gets it, but also someone who has the knowledge and experience to be able to provide them with that kind of support. And another thing that's very important to me is mental health within the bariatric community. There's exercise and there's diet, but I think one of the most important parts of this journey that I learned myself is really being cognizant of your mental health along the way and making sure you're kind of keeping tabs of the progress, because it does happen quickly and there's a lot associated to weight loss outside of just the weight itself. So Um, a little bit on my personal journey. I struggled with obesity and mental health my entire life, since I can remember. I struggled with my weight no matter what I tried. All efforts were failed, and typically followed by gaining more weight than I had initially lost. Um, Up until I was about 25 years old, where I decided, enough is enough. I need something more to help me. And I call my sleeve my tool because, I think that's a huge part that a lot of patients need to understand, is that this is a tool. It's not going to fix everything. And it is more than just your body. It is also the mind that goes on this journey. And I learned that through the progression of my weight loss. So from months about 4 to 11, and mind you, I've never had an addiction in my life. I've always been a pretty well-rounded person, kind of like the good girl of my family, and never really struggled at this level. And from months 4 to 11, I experienced the progression of transfer addiction to alcohol. I never really considered myself a food addict, but that was something I came to identify with as my journey progressed. I didn't realize that food was something that I was really, truly dependent on emotionally. So when the time had come, I had my surgery. The restriction kind of removed that coping skill for me. Food was a coping mechanism, and it was something I could no longer partake in. That, in combination with the fact that, I had a newfound confidence, I had gotten out of a relationship that I was pretty unhappy with. I had just moved to Florida. I'm feeling good about myself, and it started with, me going out with friends to the bars and just enjoying myself, and weekends turned to weeknights, and weeknights turned to every night, and then my bar tab was becoming too expensive. Um, and I started having parties at home, and then I was getting noise complaints, so I was drinking with a couple people, and then before I knew it, in that progression, I was drinking earlier in the evening and then earlier in the day, and then before I knew it, I was drinking alone, and it was taking a shot of vodka in the morning for me to get out of bed and function. And I'm a I'm a high functioning human. That's what I would consider myself. So this was it was difficult, and I I considered myself a functioning alcoholic, which is not a thing, by the way. But I was still working out. I was meal prepping. I was continuing to work. I was got a promotion at my job. Like, things were still going. So, and people on the exterior weren't really seeing what I was going through. But it had gotten to a point on July 25th of 2021 where I realized that I couldn't stop drinking on my own. I'd gotten to almost a full bottle of vodka per day. Um, there's a misconception in the community that alcohol kind of hits you harder, and that might be the case in the beginning, but what I found was, because of my sleeve, it would kind of run through me. I'm not sure what was being absorbed. So I was able to take in mass amounts of alcohol. I wasn't eating because, as you know, we cannot eat and drink at the same time. So I would drink and not really eat. I'd eat breakfast and maybe eat at night, but there wasn't much eating going on during the day. My nutrition had really suffered. And, through my experience in rehab, once I was rehabilitated, I had voluntarily admitted myself, gone for a month. And, my blood work was pretty bad at that time. When I had admitted myself, I was struggling with my health on various levels. I had stopped getting my period. I could not move a bowel without some sort of, assistance. Um, my face was so swollen, even though I was at my lowest weight. Like, I was just not in a healthy place. And before I admitted myself to rehab, I had I think it was 9 or 10 month appointment with my bariatric team, and they are just fantastic people, and they know me, so they were able to tell something was up, and I'm very open, and I was like, listen, I am struggling heavily. I cannot get out of bed without drinking. I would have never seen this coming. Like, I just was not okay. And it was a few days later that I had decided to admit myself to a voluntary rehab, which was the best thing I had done. And I'd continued mental health care thereafter, and had also, gotten on medication for anxiety and depression, got back on track with my vitamins, and berry melts was a huge part of that. So being able to slowly ease back into taking vitamins regularly, because as I said, my blood work was suffering from my addiction. So berry melts had really helped me get back on track in that sense. And then, just piecing everything back together. And as of the 25th of April, I am 1,000 days sober. I have not had any mind altering substances. And through my journey, I have found other ways to cope. And that's really what I want to drive as the message here, is that it all comes down to mental health and helping your patients find ways to cope along the way, and to understand that this process is not just physical, it is also mental. Um,
Thank
so
you.
with that,
Real quick,
go
if you don't
ahead.
mind, Gianna, thank you so much for, giving us that background, telling us your story. I think it's really helpful for everyone to understand, what patients might be going through. And I think this topic isn't nearly as talked about in the community as it should be. And so, let's dive into a little bit about the prevalence of transfer addiction, because again, I think a lot of times it flies under the radar. And
Yep.
also, some statistics, just so that everyone on the call can understand, how many patients might be struggling with this. And then, the number is probably way more than just what the statistics provide. So could you kind of dive into that for us?
Absolutely. I think that just like with obesity, there's a lot of shame and stigma around addiction within society. And obesity reflects itself on the exterior, which leads to a lot of trauma for individuals who struggle with it their whole life. But the thing about addiction is it doesn't quite present itself the same. So I think patients tend to hide in shame, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just be normal, or whatever the feelings are? It's kind of hard to present to people, just like it's hard for a lot of patients to follow through with bariatric surgery. They see it as, some people see it as taking the easy way out, when that is not the case. And just like we need tools for obesity, there are tools for addictive behaviors and mental health as well. So why is transfer addiction so prevalent in bariatric patients? Um, Prior to surgery, whether someone may be in touch with it or not, there's often a compulsive eating habit involved, a bad relationship with food, whether it be an eating disorder of sorts, or just a toxic relationship with food and nutrition. Often obese people struggle with unresolved trauma and poor coping mechanisms. And then after surgery, when those things are left unresolved and there's a new restriction in place, sadly, that's when transfer addiction can ensue as a coping mechanism in place of food. That was the case for me. I was eating my emotions, and when that ability was no longer there, I had turned to something else. And we'll talk about, there's other transfer addictions. It's not just alcohol. It can turn to a plethora of different things, just compulsive behaviors that are replacing that void that's not being filled in a healthy way. So as Austin said, I want to speak to some facts and statistics that I find pretty shocking myself. So 30% of bariatric patients actually report transferring their addictive eating behaviors to that of something else. So this was reported by a study in the Journal of Obesity Surgery. 7.6% of those patients struggled with alcohol specifically. It is among the most prevalent of the addictions. And just mind you, as I said, there's a lot of shame behind the admittance of this kind of thing. So I'm not even sure these statistics are accurate, because I don't think that a lot of patients come forward. And that's where we're going to talk about some red flags and a way to, build that rapport with your patients so that they feel comfortable admitting to you if they are struggling. And there's also to set the standard prior to surgery. So the pre-op and the post-op awareness we'll talk about. And then obviously, transfer addiction is associated specifically with psychological distress. So again, the obesity surgery, um, the Journal of Obesity Surgery had found that bariatric patients with transfer addiction had higher levels of anxiety and depression than those who do not report having struggles with transfer addiction. And then obviously there's an increased risk of surgical complications and outcomes that are negative with patients who do struggle, such as, reoperation rates and things like that, surgical complications, health issues, than those who did not struggle with transfer addiction. Um, So, and as you can see, the image on the top right really resonated with me. You see a lot online and with patients of them feeling so proud and happy with their results. And that really does happen. You have that honeymoon phase where you're like, this is amazing. I'm finally losing the weight. I feel so good. And the confidence kicks in. But then, things are bound to get hard at one point or another. And if you don't have those tools in your toolbox alongside of your sleeve or your RNY, like it's going to come to the surface in a way that is not healthy for the patient. So there are, as I had mentioned, some other common forms of transfer addiction. So for me, it was alcohol. For others, it can be drug abuse. It can be sex addiction, masturbation addiction. Shopping is a common one because, like, the new confidence, you want to buy new clothes and all this stuff, but it also produces like that dopamine that you would get from eating. So shopping, gambling, etc. Anything you can think of that could be a compulsory behavior can fall into this bucket. And then, as I'd mentioned, there are some psychological and physiological mechanisms at play here. So in terms of the neurobiological changes, as you all know as healthcare professionals, there are some alterations in the neurobiological pathways within the patient's reward system, how they process reward, and that's linked to addiction. So these surgeries cause a fluctuation in hormones such as ghrelin and leptin and the different peptides, and those play a key role in reward signaling and appetite. So those hormonal changes influence the patient's brain and cause, changes that can kind of lead to a transfer addiction where food isn't the option any longer. And then, as I'd mentioned, reward pathways and dopamine dysregulation. So when that food is no longer there for the patient to rely on for that hit of dopamine, these reward circuits can get disrupted, and this can cause a shift in behaviors. And then psychological vulnerabilities in obese people can often be present, whether that be from low self-esteem, anxiety and depression, emotional trauma. And this can often cause those maladaptive coping mechanisms to transfer to other things, such as the ones mentioned in the previous slide. And then psychosocial stressors and life transitions. I don't think that society really understands what comes as a result of mass weight loss. And I don't think I was prepared for it either. Um, you know, the social aspect is pretty bizarre, going from being a obese person to someone who's thinner, and how society treats you and the people in your life and the different transitions in things like boundaries, for instance. I was always the funniest, loudest person in the room, and I came to realize as I'd gotten more comfortable in my identity that wasn't associated to who I am. That was because I was overcompensating for how society treated me. So those kinds of like social, and that's just an example, but there's a lot of social factors and stressors at play that patients often don't talk about because it took me years to even put my finger on it. So I wanted to speak to those.
And John, if we could just pause for 1 second, I think that the background information was tremendous. I mean, there's no, like, we can talk about transfer addiction, but to hear it from someone who's actually been through it and overcome it, I mean, that it just makes the world of difference. And I believe most of the people on the call today are practitioners, whether it's dietitians, people that work in medical offices. So I think this next section is going to be really valuable. Of like, okay, so transfer addictions are very prevalent. How can we look out for them? What are the warning signs? How can practitioners speak with patients about transfer addictions? And so I think, as we kind of move through the second half here, focusing on the practitioners, I think this will be a really interesting section as well. So thanks for the background, and yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of warning signs and red flags in patients, I think it's really important to build, like I said, build that rapport with your patient pre-op, so you can really kind of get to know body language and social cues and kind of understand them a bit better, so that when the post-op period comes and those changes are happening and you're having those appointments every few months, you can maybe have the chance of detecting it yourself. Obviously, like, we know you are all very busy, you have a lot of patients, so this might not be the case. And that's where those pre-op indicators and resources come into play. So some things that can be red flags or warning signs are behavioral changes. So if you have a patient who's super bubbly before surgery and they're coming in post-op as they're losing the weight and you're noticing a slump or an emotional or behavioral kind of shift, don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Social withdrawal and isolation, for me, I had my surgery during COVID, so that was easily hidden for me was, oh yeah, like I can't come out or I can't do this and that because COVID. But in reality, that's not the case anymore. So you notice your patients are mentioning withdrawal from society or just isolating, I would, again, open the conversation. Emotional distress, such as crying during appointments or anything like that, that's beyond just the norm. And then mentions of compulsive behaviors. Oh, yeah, I've been going to the bar every weekend, or I've been finding, that even, sometimes it shifts to other things like people working out 3 to 4 times a day. Just anything that's not done in moderation should be seen as a red flag. And then there's the importance of awareness for practitioners and for the patient, both pre-op and post-op. So as you know, it starts with the pre-op education. So letting your patients know, and I know that there's a struggle with the balance, right, of scaring them and educating them. We don't want to scare people, but we do want them to go into this with the right kind of mindset, with the right awareness so that they can avoid this kind of thing. Mind you, this was mentioned to me pre-op, but I didn't take it very seriously. And I also think that, this should be a bigger part of the pre-op education just outside of the practitioner to patient dialogue. This should be part of the materials and part of the bigger conversation. And there's resources like myself and like you who can make this more of a mainstream topic. I think another big thing that we all know of is the psych evaluation. Um, I think that there's a lot of value on the practitioner's end of who is being referred to. So I know a lot of practices have just like one counselor that they'll refer the person to for their psych eval, and making sure that that person is reputable, that they understand the risks of bariatric surgery and what comes with that mentally and what to look for in patients pre-op to ensure that they're ready to make the step, because that's really a huge part of this, right? Is making sure patients are ready and mentally prepared. And then there's the knowledge and resources. And then, as I mentioned, stressing the importance of mental health. I would recommend to every patient, if you can, that, weekly or biweekly therapy through, pre-op all the way through surgery and post-op, making sure that they're touching base with someone and staying self-aware and tracking their progress and changing mentally with the physical, because it happens very quickly, the changes, and we want to make sure that patients are staying in touch with themselves. And then the resources for your patients. So there's support groups. The online ones can be a little tough, like the public ones, but if you have some that are reputable that you can recommend, there's a ton of resources out there. There's also social support groups for bariatric patients. I love the Bariatric Society. I attended their retreats and their local groups. I have found some amazing friends who understand me, who have been through similar things through their online presence. Obviously, rehab facilities for addiction is a great resource. I went to what's the word I'm looking for? A voluntary one myself, and picked a really good one that was incredible to me and led me to where I am today. And then counseling services. So I do weekly therapy. I've done it for the last 3 years, and it has absolutely changed my life. I am coping at such a high level, and I've healed my relationship with food and with my body, and that has been the most incredible blessing that I never thought I could achieve. And then obviously there's NA and AA and 12-step programs as an incredible resource to addicts, who can meet other addicts that aren't necessarily bariatric patients, but just people who understand. Because I think there's a really human aspect to all of this, and it comes down to mental health. So making sure that patients understand the importance of taking care of their mind with their body through this process, and that health goes deeper than that of just solving, the struggles of obesity, but also solving the mental health struggles that come along the way.
And Gianna, I remember at one point you mentioned in your rehab facility, it was not bariatric specific or anything like that, but I believe there were many other bariatric patients. Is that right? And maybe just touch a bit on what you found there.
Yeah, and this was really bizarre to me and opened my eyes. It was kind of a pivotal moment, I think, in my own bariatric um, journey and also within my passion for bariatric patients and the phenomenon of transfer addiction. When I had gone to rehab, like I'd said, it was a voluntary rehab, had nothing to do with bariatrics. There were 5 other bariatric patients in there, mostly struggling with alcoholism. But we had kind of come out of the woodwork through like mentioning it, and then another person would mention it, and then someone else would come to the two of us, and then someone, and I was just blown away. Like I had no idea it was so prevalent. I felt so alone in that time in my life. And that was just huge, not only to just my journey, but to my understanding of like, wow, this is so much bigger than it's made out to be. And that kind of started my journey and kind of set a fire for me of like, I needed to do something about this because I wanted, I wish I had that resource for myself to know like, hey, this is a risk you should be aware of. So yeah, that was bizarre. Thanks for bringing that up. I know I forgot to talk about it.
Yeah, no problem. And we have a few minutes here. So as we wrap up, if there are any questions, I think we might be able to take one or two. There's just a little Q&A button within Zoom, so feel free to type away if there's something you'd like us to cover. I think two last things here. So first of all, Gianna, I just can't thank you enough for being open, sharing your story, telling all of that. I think if practitioners on the call, if you think your patients would benefit from more stories like this, little plug for Gianna. So she shares her videos on our social media. She has her own social media account. She writes for us. We do weekly newsletters. So this education component is very important for us here at Berry Melts. And so if you feel like your patients could benefit from more, have them check out Gianna at Berry Melts. That's our social handles. They can sign up for our newsletter, berrymelts.com, through the homepage. Gianna, share again your account just in case people want to write it down.
Yeah, my account is on Instagram, bsgianna_. If any of your patients are, interested in having someone that kind of gets it or could just use a friend. And I also want to point out that I still to this day love my berry melts. I take them every day with the, one a day option of the step up. And that was a huge kind of factor in getting me back to where I needed to be after my struggle with alcoholism post-bariatric surgery. And I've actually done a video on my vitamin routine and on what my, my morning routine with berry melts looks like on the berry melts Instagram, if any of your patients are interested in checking that out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gianna. Guys, we're doing these at least quarterly, sometimes a bit more. We have another webinar coming up at the end of June. So you'll see information about that. You can register. The topic for our next webinar is going to be the shifting demographics of bariatric surgery. And so it kind of plays right into what we talked about today in the sense of, younger and younger patients are considering surgery. What does that look like? How are their needs, challenges, perspectives different? So be sure to, be on the lookout for that webinar. Again, it's coming at the end of June. Last piece, this webinar has been recorded, and so I'll shoot out an email at the end with the recording. So if there are other people in your office that you would like to watch this, possibly some patients, feel free to send the link their way. With that, I think I'm good. Thank you guys for taking 30 minutes out of your day here. We really appreciate it. And Gianna, I'll let you have the last word. Anything else from your end?
No, I think I pretty much spewed everything I had to say for the last 30 minutes. So thank you all for listening. It truly means the world to me. This topic is so close to my heart, and I appreciate you having me today. So thank you, Austin. Thank you, Berry Melts.
I just saw a few questions come in. Let me see. So I touched on the recording. Yes, I'll send that out. No problem. Got, some thanks and congratulations to you, Gianna, in the
Thank you.
Q&A. And then last question, what are the most challenging situations you faced during your bariatric journey? So your meals, your vitamins, working out, maybe in the last 2 minutes, if you'll just touch a bit on your routine, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a very structured human being, so It was a challenge for me to get in the flow of my meals and my workouts and my vitamins, but once I kind of had that routine down, that was doable for me. I would say the harder part along my journey was the self-love and self-acceptance, was, seeing myself for more than just my body, and appreciating the health aspect of the bariatric journey over, the other struggles such as loose skin and body dysmorphia and other, difficult challenges that come from extreme weight loss. So for me, that was the biggest challenge. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for taking the time, and have a great rest of your week. We'll see you at the end of June for our next Barry Mounts webinar. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.